It is a known fact that 85% of the people that go out fishing come back with nothing. So my job is to try and get that rate up the other 15%. And it's all time consuming, and it all takes a little bit of care. And I hope over the next half hour or so we'll be able to share some of these experiences. I even got a mate from where I live. What more would you want? How good is that? Okay, first of all, when you're going fishing, we're going to talk a little bit about estuary. Most people don't really worry too much what they're doing, what they're not doing, but there's a few cardinal rules which you've got to undertake if you really want the best results. Okay, first and foremost, how many people in this area worry about the weather? I'd like to think most of you do. So, first of all, when you go out in the morning and all that sort of thing, you really got to take the weather into consideration. The first step that I would be looking at, probably 2 or 3 days prior to me going fishing, is look at the weather. Checking the tides, and also making sure that the wind you're going to get coincides with the tide. So it's no use going out there if you've got a run-out tide and a nor'easter, because one goes against the other. You're not going to catch fish that way. That's so important, right? And it is something that you must really care. The other thing also, many people go out there and they'll come and talk to me, they'll say, oh, I'm just going to go out there and have a go. You really got to specialise in what you're going after. You just can't go out there and hope to catch a myriad of fish. If you're going after whiting, you've got to specialise for whiting. If you're going for bream, you've got to specialise for bream. You've got to take all that on board, all that in consideration. It is so important to do that. Okay, you want to improve your catch? Okay, then you've got to excel in your endeavours and discuss your routing with someone you're going to go out with, get others' opinion, value their opinion. I think it's very important. Okay, well, if I'm going to go fishing for whiting, for example, or for bream or flathead, the best times to go that I've found over the years, it's always been during 2, 3, 4 days prior to the full moon period until the day after. And the same thing applies to the new moon period. We find that during this time, the tides tend to raise a little bit of a cliff, and then you're getting your tides around 1.5, 1.6 metres. And especially if you're going to go for whiting, that's the sort of tides that you need. You need fast running water. When you've got very little water in it, all you'll catch is stingrays and the likes. So it's very important. In your first quarter and third quarter period, you'll get tides that look like this. Your high tide will be here, your low tide will be here, right? And what you're going to have a very high low tide. So it might be 1 metre, 0.8, and this tide here might be 1.6, okay, or 1.4. So which means basically that you've only got 0.6 metre run between the low tide and the high tide. That's not going to work for you. You'll catch nothing during that time. And it's a known fact that you really need that clip. So the first quarter and third quarter moon, just reserve them for other occasions. I had a gentleman come in today and he was saying to me that the water here was not very clear. It was had a little bit of a brown colour to it, black colour. And the reason why, the water's a little bit stagnant because it's not getting any run through it. But next week will be a different story when you're going to have your tides be very low and the high tide will be much higher and you get a lot more flow through. And that's when the fish will bite more readily. So keep that in mind as well. Any questions on the tides while we're here? Everybody knows about the neap tides? Well, that's what they call neap tides. And they occur on the first quarter and third quarter of the moon. That is very important, right? So if you're going to go out there, leave your time until the new moon and full moon period. You'll find that 9 times out of 10 people won't catch fish because the fishing's too heavy. Over the years we've changed and we've come to use different lines, different ways, different methods. And if you want to catch bream and you want to catch whiting, you've got to change your rigs, you've got to change your tackle, and you've got to change your selection. This is fluorocarbon under a microscope. What did that show you? You can't work it out, can you? Fluorocarbon is actually a hollow line with a lot of little holes in it, a lot of little slots in it. Does anybody know here why those slots are there for? Does anybody know? Well, I'll tell you why they're there for. They're to allow the water to go in and come out. So you've got the water going into those holes and come out of those holes. And that's the reason that becomes part of the actual water that you are fishing into. So in other words, the fluorocarbon becomes invisible in any way, shape or form. I've got some line there which I'll show you later on that will become part of it. So you just can't see it. The only thing you've got to be careful with fluorocarbon is, obviously if you're fishing in an area which might have a lot of rubbish or might be coloured or might have whatever mud in it, your line will become the same colour as the water. So you really got to take all that in on board. You've got to weigh up your situation, whether you're going to use monofilament or whether you're going to use fluorocarbon. There's 2 or 3 different types of fluorocarbon. That's a single strand. It's 2 strand and 3 strand. What does that mean to you fellas? Who knows what it means? Okay, what it means is very simple. By having 1, 2 and 3 strands on the fluorocarbon, what it does, it puts an extra coating on top. So for the fellas that are fishing the rocks, obviously, when they're going to hit the rock, you've got 1 to stop you, 2 to stop you, and that one there. So if you're going to buy a fluorocarbon for the rocks, you want to make sure that you get a 30x abrasion resistant fluorocarbon because of those 3 on the outside. It's very important. It's also a lot stiffer, and it's a great fluorocarbon for use outside for outside fishing where you won't. If you're using a paternoster rig, it will stop your line from twisting. What do you look for when you're going fishing for whiting, for example? What's the first thing that you do when you go looking for whiting? What do you do when you go looking for whiting? You haven't done it for a long time. Okay, what do you do when you go looking for whiting? What do you look for?
I look for, well, first I just put some bread out and see if it out.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, I don't usually burley for whiting, but if that's what you do, that's fine. The first thing you look for when you're fishing for whiting is a particular type of bottom. There's a type of bottom where you get small whiting, and there's a different type of bottom where you get big whiting. Simple as that. So you've got to take all that into consideration. So this is the sort of bottom that you're going to be looking when you're... Doesn't matter how big your patch is, this is the sort of bottom that you're going to catch big whiting on. And I'm talking about whiting in the 40 plus category. I'm not talking about whiting 30, 35. Up on that, right? I got some whiting during the year, 48, 49. That's the sort of bottom you're looking for. It doesn't really matter how long it's going to take you, but it is so important. So you've got that and run into that. That little dot there, right, is the edge of the cockle bed, and that's where whiting go. The big fellas hang around, and that's where you'll find them. Something else too. Does anybody notice, have you ever seen a whiting in the shop, why it's so brown in the mouth? Have you ever seen, do you know the reason why? Because they bury their nose into it, into there, and suck the worms and pippies out. That's the truth. Yeah, I went to the markets yesterday and I saw whiting there for $29.99 a kilo, right? And that's ridiculous, you know what I mean? A lot of money, and they were all nice and brown on the mouth because they were caught obviously up the rivers into these cockle beds. Does anybody know what type of bottom that is? You all know what type of bottom that is? That is a weed corridor bottom. That's what the bottom looks like when you're fishing a weed corridor. So obviously, when you're taking your boat onto the sand flats and you're looking for weed corridors, that's the sort of bottom you're going to be looking for. The idea is, this is the weed patches there, there and there. The idea is for you to anchor in one of these weed patches and cast into the sand. The same thing applies, it's very important, the same thing applies when you're fishing for flathead, but not so much for brim. Brim is like a different type of bottom, which I'll come to in a moment. With a brim bottom, you'll be looking for something like this. And you notice why there's a gap there all the time. There's a gap there, 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 there's a gap there. You notice why there's a gap there all the time? Because you're actually moving, right? And the faster you go, the gaps will become closer. The slower you go, the gaps will become wider. Okay, so this is sort of bottom that you'll be looking when you're fishing for brim. You won't get a lot of whiting on that type of bottom because that is a harder terrain. You got shale, you got gravel, you got reef, and you also got weed. So take that in consideration, take that on board. Heavy weed corridors, they look like this. So when you're actually driving your boat across these weed corridors, if you find something like that, you're going to catch fish. That is very, very thick weed. And you've got about 4 different types of weeds, so you can really look for it. But that's the sort of bottom that you're going to be looking for in an estuary. The next thing that I'm going to show you is what to look for when you're fishing for dewies. This is sort of terrain or bottom, if you like, if you're fishing for dewies. You normally find the dewies, they start biting well in the estuaries on the first full moon in November. Normally the first or second week in November is when the dewies start coming around. And what you'll do, they'll come in, and that's the first run of dewies. Right, normally they call them soapies, so they're very mushy. And by the way, if you're going to cook a dewey, always wait for the ladies 2 or 3 days before you cook it, because what happens in it gets a lot more firmer and a lot easier for you to cook. Okay, but you look for a deeper hole or a well-known hole, that the salinity actually affects them. So they go into deeper water, because that's a different level of salinity that you've got. Okay, and so by going deeper, you've got more salinity on the bottom. And the salinity will only go to here, to here, to here, and to here. And so you'll find all the dewies there. That's why, if you get a bit of a fresh, and you know the area very well, then obviously you're going to be targeting places. And one of the areas, obviously, you'll be North Haven Bridge. That'll be the place to target them. And that's a very important thing. If you're fishing for dewies under lights, you never ever fish in front of the bridge. You always go behind the pylons. Does anybody know why? I'll draw it for you. You know why dewies don't go in front of the pylons but behind the pylons? Because they're bloody smart. So you don't know that if they go in front of the pylon, the fish can see them. But if they hide behind the pylon, the fish can't see them. They're not silly. You knew that, didn't you? There's your bridge. This is a plan view. And you've got an incoming tide. You never ever fish on this side, or you fish on that side. Because what's going to happen, the dewies will hang around here. And when the fish come through, the dewies will get into them. Very clever. So the idea is for you to anchor here, anchor here, anchor here, and the tide's coming towards you, you cast towards the pylon, and what's going to happen, 9 times out of 10, your bait will stay there because it eddies, and then slowly will turn back and come back, and that's when the fish takes it. Now the fish will take it more readily because he can't feel the weight, because the line is coming towards it, so it's got no weight. Does that make sense to you? It's not hard. I use graphite because it's much lighter than fiberglass, and it's a lot more sensitive, and I can keep it all day. Okay, what I've got here is a 7-foot rod, or if you like a 2.10 metre rod, a 2 to 4 kilo line rating. A lot of people say, oh, I want a 2 to 4 kilo rod. They haven't got a clue why they're buying that rod, because it says 2 to 4 kilo. Do you really know why you're buying that rod? If it's got 3 to 6 kilo on the rod, or it's got 6 to 8 kilo on the rod, or if it's got 2 to 4 kilo on the rod, you know what that means? What it actually means is the line recommended by the manufacturer. So if you've got 2 to 4 kilo, the manufacturer recommends you using 2 to 4 kilo line. Okay, I use a bait runner, and I'll show you the reason why I use a bait runner in a second. It is so important. Okay, I use a 4 kilo line, and notice I don't use braid, and I use a 4 pound trace, a 2 kilo trace. Notice the trace that I've got, it's very long. It's around about 7 foot long. Size 4 Aberdeen hook, 4 pound fluorocarbon leader, a size 8 crane swivel, and a little bead. That little bead is so important you don't realise it, because what that does, that bead acts as a shock absorber. So when the sinker hits it, doesn't make any noise. Because the noise, that when your sinker hits that swivel, they can hear it and frightens them. So put that on there, and it stops any noise coming through. Now, the reason why we use bait runners, it's very simple, but very effective. I'm going to convert you blokes to all bait runners. Okay, you're in the boat. The method for fishing the estuary is very simple. The only thing that changes is the size of the hooks, the size of the trace, right? The bait. Okay, you always cast on the side. It doesn't matter where you are, all right? And you've got your bait runner set on, so your line acts as an arc. It comes back behind the boat. This side does the same thing. What do you achieve from that? First of all, the most thing that you achieve is the distance that you are covering. Where normally, if you cast it back, you're only going to cover 25 metres. This way you're covering 25 metres plus all this area here, plus another 25 metres there. Does that make sense to you? And that's the way you fish it. And what happens is, by having the bait runner, you're covering all this ground. So the method is, you cast there, and let it come back. When it gets there, wait a couple of seconds, then wind your line back in and cast again. Right? That's one method of doing it. So, any questions there? Okay. If you're fishing on the slack tide, the best simple way to do it is just a line, a size 4 hook, and a very, very small split shot right on the hook. Not even a quarter of an inch, an eighth of an inch enough. That's all you need. That's the way to fish. This has only been the last few years that we've worked this out. What you do when the tide stops running, right, then it's time to change your tactics. Because it's no use using a longer trace, and it's no use casting that, because you're not going to cover that ground if the tide stops running. So what you do, you use the same rod, but you just cut your trace to about 1 metre. And what you do, you still use your nippers, you can use peel prawn, you can use everything else, you can use your bloodworms, you can use whatever you like. But that's when you start jigging. Has anyone done jigging for whiting before, or bream before? So what you do is, I just got to be very careful with the hooks. I'm a bit concerned about it. Okay. I think I'll take the hook off just in case. Okay, just cast your line, right? She'll go down on the bottom. You just hold your rod and you wind your slack up. You wind your slack up. After you wind your slack up, right, you make sure that you can feel the weight of the sinker. So you wind your sinker alone, and all you do is just lift your rod up very, very slowly. That's going like that. Very, very slow, and stop. Right? Then you just drop it down again, then bring it up again, second time, and you bring it up very, very slowly again. And you watch it all the time, then stop. And the second time you move it up a bit more, and if you get a tap, you know that something's interested. And what happens, you're going to see your rod tip bend down, and you don't touch it. You touch it, you won't catch anything. 99% of the people will strike when they do that. It doesn't work like that. Okay? So what you do, you lower your rod down, wind the slack up again, and then slowly do that again. And 9 times out of 10, you'll see your rod just go like this. So once you do that, 9 times out of 10, the fish will be hooked. and you won't lose it. That works really well on flathead, whiting and bream. Any questions on that? You've got to try it. Until you try it, you won't know. You know, it does work particularly well though. Now, what we're going to talk about, fishing for dewies under the lights. I'll just give you a little bit of a hint here. It's very important. If I was going to go fishing for dewies, the first thing that I would do, I would look at the area that I'm fishing. It's no use me coming here. It's no use me coming here and bringing Sydney Harbour squid or bringing Port Macquarie squid, right? I'd be looking at a place where I could get a squid around Harrington. You know, I'd be looking very close to the breakwall, weed patches there. I don't know whether there's any squid there or not, but that's where I'd be looking at. I'd be looking for an area where there's likely to be squid, and using a very small jig, no more than 2, no more than 2.2. At the moment, the flavour of the month is a white colour, all white. And I'd be looking after and trying to get some squid. Once you get the squid, half your battle's there. You can go two ways about it. But with having squid, you can use your squid whole, right? Or you can use your squid in strips. It works very well. Last year I got the squid and I was going for dewies and I cut some strips like that. I caught everything else but dewies. So, you know what I mean? It's just, sometimes even whiting will take squid when you cut it like a worm. Squid is a very versatile bait. But so wherever you possibly can, stick to your local bait. That is so important. And always avoid in touching fresh water. If you catch a squid, don't put it in fresh water. Always stick to salt water. That is so important because it takes away all the goodness in the squid. Even when you clean your fish, you should never take them home and clean them in the kitchen or anything like that. You're taking away, you know. With the dewies, okay, you've got pick the full moon is the best time to pick the dewies. If you've got a high tide around about dusk or an hour after dusk, that seems to be the best time to fish in the estuaries for them. I really like fishing for dewies, and they're always going to be around, especially around about that time. But the most important thing when you're fishing for dewies, you use the same method as the bait runner, right? But you set your drag a little bit heavier so it doesn't move that much. And 9 times out of 10, people make a mistake when they get a bite, they'll strike. A typical dewey bite will be to pick it up, run a little bit with it, then until they find out what's going on, then run off with it. They will have the teeth, they will have the bait in the mouth, but they won't swallow it. So what's going to happen, you've got to have a lot of patience. Sometimes they'll run up to 50, 60 metres before even swallowing it. And the best thing to do is grab a coat, have a coat while you're there fishing, let the fish run with it. When the fish stops, grab your rod and give it 2 hits like that. Okay, 9 times out of 10 you will catch the dewies. Dewies gives you 1 or 2 good runs. After that, they've had it. Very important. But most of the fish will be lost on the boat because of inexperience. So you've just got to be extremely careful when that happens. Right, my time is limited. Okay, so this is a method that I would suggest for flathead. First of all, the sinker needs to be a little bit different shape than your ball sinker. Yeah, this is what they call a bean sinker. You're welcome. Right, I like using around about a 12-pound line. Once again, a bait runner, 10-pound trace. Once again, I've got the bead and a ball bearing swivel which stops the line twist. I use a Mr. Twister on the end, and the colour that I use is a rusty green, which is very natural, with 2 tails. And then I've got a bead running onto it. Then I get a fresh prawns wherever I can get the prawns, right? And you get a whole prawn, and you cut the tail off the prawn, and then you pinch the head and remove the head. So what you've got a prawn there with no tail, but all the guts in the head. And after that, you get the prawn, and you put the prawn on that hook there, which I like 2 O's and 3 O's, 9, 2, 6, 4, 7 S's. They are excellent bait keepers, and you put your prawn on top of that. So you've got your plastic, and you've got your fresh prawn that does the job. It's an infallible method that will get you all the flathead under the sun. That's what you've got to do. And drifting and letting that bounce on the bottom, right? And making sure it's always tight all the time, because that bounces up and down all the time with that bottom, and that will bounce up and down all the time. And having both the plastic and the hooks